When I'm building applications, typically what I find is I need to create certain tables and then generate some synthetic data just to get my application bootstrapped. So I recently wrote this application and I'm calling it syndicator.com. It works only for SingleStore, but technically since it is MySQL wire protocol compatible, it should work with MySQL as well, but just a caveat, I have not tested it. So let's say you are in a free tier on SingleStore. So what we are going to do is go to deployments. And first thing you want to do is to create a new user with the password. And I've created this new user and password, and it's in a connection string, which I'll share in the screen share, but then I'll delete it later because then everybody gets access to it otherwise. So then the next thing you do is you go to connect and look at either SQL ID or your app. And now you have your entire connection string, but it has to be formatted as a MySQL, which I'll show in a second. Now, just for this demonstration, what I'm going to do is I will go to this table that I have currently and drop it. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to show how to create a brand new table and then generate data for it. You can take an existing table and generate data for it as well. Just be careful that sometimes it will find or it'll generate primary keys, which might already exist in the table. It doesn't do a check against those. But if it does find a primary key, it's just going to ignore it and go to the next record. So you won't see an error, but you will not see as many rows of data generated. So the first things first, once I get to Syndicator, I click on connect to database and then I put in my connection string. And once you put in the connection string, you can either do a test connection, which tells you that, yeah, it is successful. And once it is successful, you can click on connect. And now that you know it's connected, you can minimize this and let's go to add to schema. Now I'm going to go recreate that table. So let's call it orders again. I want to call it order ID as the primary key. And I want to do big int. Let's make it a primary key, obviously not nullable. But even if it was a primary key and you chose this accidentally, it's still going to create a non-nullable column. Next, I'm going to call this a product ID. And this one could be just an int and also not nullable. I'm going to add a date, order date. And this one has to be a date data type, also not nullable. And then of course, like any other orders, it should have order total. And this would be maybe a double, because it's going to be in currency. And then I hit create table. And now if I minimize this and go to generate synthetic data, now I see that this orders table is created. If you had multiple tables, you would see this in the drop down. And it gives you the overall metadata of this table, of which one is nullable, which one is primary key, and so on. Now, in order to generate the data, I typically, because it's a free tier, I do it in batch sizes and I keep it at 100, but you can change it. And then after it has generated and inserted that batch, it waits for a second so it doesn't overwhelm your network as well as the database. Although even it's on a free tier, it can take a lot more queries per second. And then of course, the total number of records you want to generate, which for now, I'm just going to keep to 1,000. So once I hit start generate, it uses in the background this Python library called Faker, and it generates fake data or synthetic data. And then it basically creates batches and does an insert for each one of these batches till you have reached the total record that you have defined over here, which in our case is a total of 1,000. Now, once it's in here, you can just stay in here and just hit refresh data. And now you can see that there's a total of 1,000 rows and it gives you just the 10 rows for you to look at it. This is supposed to be a currency, the order date, the product ID, and the order ID. To confirm, I can go back here to SingleStore and say select star from orders. And also let's refresh the schema viewer so you can see that this orders table now exists. And if I hit a select star, you can see it'll show you the first 300. So you can use this for very basic use cases. Again, for bootstrapping your application, because I find that this is a very easy way of doing it versus generating your own SQL. But there are caveats, like I mentioned earlier. If you have composite primary keys and those keys already exist, just be sure that when it says that it has inserted or there was a total batch of 1,000, it might have only inserted about 10 or 15 because there were other existing primary keys that existed in the database. Hope you find this useful. And if you have any other questions, feel free to comment. Thanks.